Hello, I'm Org, and in this video I'm going to review the Type T-34, the Chinese Tier 5 medium. The short version of this review is that it's a good little tank, although it has some limitations. Normally I begin these reviews with a bit of history about the tank, but in this instance I don't know any. I mean, I know plenty about the Soviet T-34, but I don't know anything about the T-34 in Chinese service. Even when I went to find information about this tank, I couldn't actually find any evidence that it existed. The only reference to a T-34-76 in Chinese service I could find was a reference to the Soviets gifting an indeterminate number of them to the People's Republic during the Korean War. However, the very next sentence said that all the T-34-76s were equipped with an 85mm gun. So in other words, it's not a T-34-76, or a Type T-34 as it's called in World of Tanks. Since this tank may not have existed, I'll skip over the history completely and get on to how the tank plays in game. If you want information on the T-34, there is plenty online. It is one of the most written about tanks in history, so you shouldn't have any trouble finding any information you want to know about it. Anyway, in game I found the best use of the Type T-34 was a flanker. Unfortunately that's not a playstyle that I'm particularly good at, but it's the best way to use this. The Type T-34 has good mobility, average armour for a medium, and a gun which is both its greatest strength and its main weakness. The Type T-34 has excellent damage per minute. I have easily traded shots with Tier 5 heavy tanks and won no problems. It has two options for a gun, a 76mm and a 57mm, and the 57mm is clearly the best choice. It has better penetration, much better accuracy, rate of fire and DPM. The 76mm does more damage per shot, but this is only beneficial if it hits and it penetrates, which it's much less likely to do than the 57mm, and even then it's only better if you wouldn't get the opportunity to fire a second shot. So yeah, 57mm by far the best option. The major downside of this tank in regards to firepower is that it only has 5 degrees of gun depression, which isn't bad compared to other tanks, but for some reason this tank it feels like it's very poor gun depression. It's so often it's a liability in this tank. In fact, the lack of gun depression had actually a huge impact on how I played this tank. In terms of armour, the Type T-34 only has 45mm on the hull fronts and sides and 52mm on the turret, and a little less on the rear of the tank. But this arm is very well sloped, and while you can't rely on it, you will get the occasional bounce, especially from Tier 3 or 4 tanks. If you angle this armour a bit yourself, the effective thickness of the armour can get fairly high in places. Also, because this tank has decent hull traverse, I had a lot of luck in wiggling my armour to deflect shots. You know, where someone aimed it at a flat surface and I suddenly move it so it becomes a highly angled surface, get an auto bounce. You can't do that every time, but I got lucky, more often than I should have. In terms of mobility, the Type T-34 is good. It is fast, although its acceleration is not the best. It also has excellent hull and turret traverse. Combined, it has a traverse of 90 degrees a second, which is sufficient to circle in the heavy tank should the need arise, and you can pretty much always keep your frontal armour towards the enemy. However, like all fast tanks, I found that I had a problem in just charging off and getting killed, because my team couldn't keep up with me. But that's my problem, not yours. As I said earlier, I tend to play this tank as a flanker primarily, but if I don't see any opportunities for flanking, it actually makes a decent sniper. As I said, it's actually got pretty excellent accuracy, penetration, especially at long ranges, and the rate of fire works at any range, so why not? Well, because of the poor gun depression, finding held down locations are difficult in this tank. I mean, I found that the most effective use of this tank was to tag along with others, preferably heavy tanks, but you know, you can't really rely on Tier 5 heavy tanks to play sensibly, and essentially use them as cover or armour. Essentially because of the rate of fire of this gun, you want to be in a situation where you can just stay still and just keep shooting. I mean, held down location is the obvious choice, but you can't in this tank. So in terms of sniping, you kind of have to wait till friendly tanks have engaged the target, and you can just sit there and keep shooting and they just will ignore you because you're only doing 80 odd damage at a time. Essentially flanking, it's kind of similar. The most effective method is you see an enemy tank that's distracted, you can approach it side the rear, you do so, you pop out, you keep firing until either the enemy dies or they notice you, in which case you should get into cover just because the hit points of this tank are low, or is low, whatever, and you can usually only take 2 or 3 hits before you are destroyed. It's also possible to simply out DPM tanks at your tier or below. Trading shots does work in this tank even against heavies, since you can quite reliably penetrate their armour. It works well so long as you only engage one target at a time, and even then by the time you get to your second or third engagement like that, you'll probably be having some difficulty simply because you're running out of hit points. So yeah, it's kind of much more sensible just to wait until you find a distracted enemy, then you start shooting at them. The other thing I can add is that you should avoid crossing ridge lines. Usually you have to expose a lot of your tank before you can shoot at the enemy on the other side, and you are very vulnerable while crossing. I found it better to stick to the low ground and go around if it were possible. The Type T-34 has sufficient gun elevation that it's not really an issue that you're at the bottom of a hill. Now, I feel the need for the obligatory comparison to the Soviet T-34. I prefer the Soviet version. The two tanks are basically the same, except that the Chinese version has worse gun depression, but slightly better traverse. The differences are only minor, but I would happily take the extra gun depression in the Soviet tank. It just gives you a bit more flexibility in where you can go and what you can do. This isn't just theoretical, by the way. I have played about 100 games in both tanks, and the Soviet tank is easily my preference. It's actually probably maybe my second favourite medium after the Panther of all the ones I've played. Well, of all the mediums I've played. My stats in this tank were average, and by average I mean very average. I didn't have very many great games. I actually had trouble finding videos to show you on this because they're all kind of average. But like, I performed consistently well in this tank. I mean, my win rate was really disappointing. I was actually surprised to see that it was only 49% after 170 games. But in retrospect, I think it actually took me a long time to realise that I have to avoid ridges in this tank, and I was constantly getting hampered by my poor gun depression by trying to poke over ridges at people. And plus it's also, I'm just not good at playing medium tanks. I don't have the patience to work alongside my team very well, which you kind of need to do if you're waiting for distracted enemies. You've got to wait for your team to get out there and distract people, which isn't my strong point. On the plus side though, I consistently did more damage than the hit points of my tanks, and I did have a positive kill to death ratio. So while I didn't win very often, I was actually kind of pulling my weight. I mean, keeping all this in mind, feel free to ignore my advice or offer alternative advice down below should you choose. I'm going to offer some commentary on this last battle just because it demonstrates a lot of what I've been talking about. You just saw me effectively sniping at a tank destroyer in the middle of the map. What I'm doing at the moment is, well, I was waiting for my team to catch up with me, but then I saw an opportunity to flank this T-14, and I kind of screw it up there by missing my shot and then driving in sniper mode and hitting a house, but eventually I managed to get round behind this T-14, and I can put some shots into its rear. Of course it's still got good armour, and I bounced the first one, but managed to pick up my second kill. You saw that BT signal at start. A Locust goes charging past me. You see my hull traverse is almost able to keep up with it. It's getting sniped from somewhere in the centre, so I pull back and aim at where I think the Locust is about to pop up. And there's kill number 3. My friendly Excelsior has finally showed up, and we spot a Wolverine. Look at what he's doing. I think he's going to go right, so I opt to go left. so that we'll flank him. But he sees I'm going left, decides to come with me, and I say, bugger this, I'm going myself then. Put one shot in while it's distracted, get a second foot returns fire, and then, well, I'm just going to out-DPM this guy. But I lose half my health doing so, so that was less than ideal, but as I say, I don't really have the patience to cooperate effectively with tanks on my team. It's my main limitation in mediums. So back to waiting for everyone to move up. I'm sure they will get here eventually. So I'm just kind of moving into a position, because you can see where they're all going, so I'll be able to flank from here, hopefully. Oh, and it's possible Wolverine and take a shot from it. And it looks like this U-85B is coming for me. That wasn't wise. Okay, my team is finally getting into position. Soon they might be able to help me. The Wolverine goes out to poke the corner, and even though I've got poor health, I can come in and, like I said, add my DPM. Like I added one shot, but I managed to get my top gun. Just like that. You seem like, I don't know. I have a tendency of running off in front of my team, getting impatient, getting killed in this tank. But even in games like this, where I've done it a fair bit, I've still managed to do 1100 damage. I mean, so long as you only fight one tank at a time, you're actually going to do more damage than your hit points, simply because your DPM is so much better than basically anything else. And here I kind of screw up, was look at the Zergsburg-Kragen, and didn't notice that the Wolverine had stopped in front of me, so I did a bit of team damage there. Now I'll just use my mobility, getting ahead of my team, because there's only one artillery left, and I'm guessing it's beside that house. And I'm right. But sadly enough, I don't get the kill. But doesn't mean this tank isn't still decent. I'm just not that great in it.